Hello. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Lord of the Dance, teaching and training, focusing a big church on front yard missions and metaphors.
Wow.
I know.
That sounds exciting.
It's amazing. It's going to be the best episode ever.
I mean, you put
episode
great
20
words to this.
Yeah, it's a new
Episode 20.
2-0.
That's a little bit of a milestone.
Sure. I like it.
Okay.
I like even numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So are you doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Doing great.
Good. So let's talk about mega church memories. In this section of the podcast, we basically just focus on what we've been through in the 80s, more 90s for me, 80s for you.
Yeah.
What should or shouldn't have been, and kind of just church culture, maybe what we've learned. Mm-hmm. So
you call this the Lord of the Dance?
Yeah. Well, because we're going to talk about choreographed pageantry. That's another way to say it. That's your, yeah. You pick whichever you prefer.
I like Lord of the Dance.
Me too. But choreographed pageantry is what got me there.
So one of the megachurch trends was dance troupes and routines and events and all kind of stuff. I know for us this was kind of a big like little subculture to our youth ministry for sure. We had lots of dance stuff going on, and so we did on our big outreach nights for youth men. There was often a dance component of it somehow. Like we had Ellen and some of these people that really loved some of these people that loved choreography.
Take the shackles off my feet so I can dance. I want to praise Him.
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
yeah, that was a big one.
Song motions.
Oh yeah,
would be part of this genre.
Oh yeah.
Remember we had the nostalgia night? Do you remember this?
Yes, I loved that. That was so awesome.
We did a fundraiser called Nostalgia Night where the youth group put a dinner on, like a dinner theater.
Yeah.
It was essentially
a
dinner
fundraiser,
theater.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we called it Nostalgia Night where we did, everything had to be like pre-1970s probably,
I think, yeah.
or something like that. Mm-hmm. So all the routines, and there was a lot of dance. So that's why it kind of hit the category, because there was tons of dance acts, and the people, certainly all the older people in the church loved it. Mm-hmm. It reminded them of childhood, and watching these kids like pay homage to their favorite, Frank Sinatra or whoever it was.
Al Jolson.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about that one. That was not a great moment.
Yeah, I mean, we had some misses.
Yeah, whatever.
For the most part, it was pretty good.
That kid can never run for president. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that was awesome, and that culminated in us having Aaron Lundberg, shout out. A dance outreach where people would like learn how to swing dance.
Right, and the swing thing.
Yeah, the swing thing. Well, there were like classes where we would like invite people in.
Yeah, we had hundreds of people come to that.
And then none come to the banquet.
Correct. Don't remind Aaron.
I've made way more expensive mistakes since then, but that was on record for a while as the most expensive. But it wasn't a mistake. It was just like people didn't come for some reason.
Yeah, they didn't come.
They came to all the classes.
Yeah,
I remember the fellowship hall being like, yeah.
So we did swing dance classes in a Baptist church, which is really funny.
It was uphill.
Yeah.
I remember this dance stuff was like my first interaction with like learning. Nobody ever taught me this, but like learning how to give good feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not good. Because like I didn't know.
Right.
Like they asked me. I was there. My friend Janelle was like directing it or whatever, and it wasn't good. Mm-hmm. And so I was like up in this upper balcony at this church, and I was just there. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I was just there. And she turned to me and she's like, Danielle, how does it look? Mm-hmm. And I was like, not great. I'm 20 years old. I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know why I'm here. This is like awful. And I'm,
And you're like, you're before your time. You're like a judge of Dancing with the Stars.
Exactly. But I mean, and that went on a long road. Like those kids thought I hated them for like 5 years, like all this stuff, just because I was
gave them some feedback.
Well, I wasn't careful with my words.
Right.
But yeah, I learned.
You probably weren't great at feedback at the beginning.
No.
No,
obviously not. Oh my gosh! And then you had to.
Something people might not know about you is you can't hide your face either.
Oh no! But I was in a balcony.
Right.
So they probably couldn't see me. But my tone sometimes. Oh, if they'd see my face, my gosh! And I remember, what it also brought in was a whole nother problem of wardrobe.
Oh, right.
What can they wear? What can they not wear?
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Because dancers are used to wearing a certain kind of clothing.
And then that's when the churches would bring in like the dance robes.
Right. The
and
long,
all the weird
flowing
stuff.
Yes.
Remember Hillsong used to have the modesty vests for their choir and stuff? This was all that time.
It was.
Because it was like, let's let them express themselves without their bodies. It's like disembodied heads just like doing all this stuff.
Darlene Check shackled down with her.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of Darlene Check, do you remember, again during this era, Pastor Al, our old lead pastor, came back from Hillsong, Australia, and taught us the motions to one of their songs, and we had to do the motions.
There we go. That's right. This is right in the
era. There was like a physical
movement
time in the church, I guess.
Now, I know we talked recently about youth retreats when it came to the games and stuff. One of the funny competitions that we had at youth retreats was the dance-off. Do you remember this?
So
where we would pick the music, but then two people would be on stage and they had to do a dance-off, and we voted for who was best. That was fun, actually.
Again,
that was really
fun.
Funny.
Those retreats
you
were
saw
awesome.
You saw different sides of people when they were dancing to
and they would do we would do like lip sync battles.
Lip sync.
Oh, well, before that was cool.
Yeah.
They would do like dances to those things. Oh my gosh, so much fun.
Yeah.
In a Baptist church.
Did we learn anything from the dance battles, the choreographed pageantry era of our history?
We didn't learn anything from the shirts last week, so we should probably learn something from this.
I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I learned how to give better feedback, but that's not related.
We learned how to break Baptist, long-standing Baptist traditions.
Okay, here's one. Again, listen, I will go for the long reach.
Go ahead. Go for the reach.
So maybe it's worth looking at things that you have, like what are your actual non-negotiables? So dance, right?
Okay.
Dance was a thing.
Right.
It was like, no, you can't, never, But why never? Where was the root of this? Why are we doing it? What can we redeem anything in this?
That's good.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, the old Baptist joke is the reason that you tell the kids in your youth group not to have sex is because it could lead to dancing.
I've never heard that.
Really?
That's funny.
Yeah, that's a good. That's an
good
old
one.
standard.
Okay. We just lost 8 Baptist pastors. Sorry.
We'll take your stretch of an answer because I can't get it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So training notes. You came from a recent training. You guys went to Willow Creek in Chicago, and you went for the GLN.
Speaking of mega churches.
Yeah. They probably had some dances in their day. I think we've seen some of them.
We saw some.
My goodness gracious.
They're good. They were better than ours, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, they didn't have.
They're drawing from like the Chicago dance troupe.
They literally had the Chicago Ballet there, probably. I mean, they had all the Chicago dance troupe. Goodness. Yeah, probably.
Is that a thing?
Probably not. That sounds like an eerie thing. Okay, so what did you learn? What do you want to share?
So I had this fascinating collision. We're doing this podcast, Reinventing Church. We're saying to the atmosphere, we're transitioning from a mega church model to a missional multiplication model. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've talked about in this whole process is like, what does it look like to go? One of our previous episodes we talked about was it look like to move from a teaching center to a training center. Okay. And how do you navigate that shift? I had in a 4-hour span of time, like a collision of worlds like I've never seen it before. So I'm in a mega church with a bunch of mega church pastors. Craig Rochelle is leading a small talk on how to give a good leadership talk.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was cool. He actually we created it together. He's cool. This is what I think, and he takes some ideas from the room, and so the thing itself was very interactive.
Yeah.
On how to create a non-interactive
teaching. Okay. Yeah.
So.
Interesting.
So the leadership talk, and so he gave kind of 5 elements of a great leadership talk. So he says, you want to have an introduction, you want to introduce the big overarching leadership theme, and you want to do that with a memorable quote or an engaging story. Okay?
Okay.
So you start with a quote or a story, you get everybody engaged in the theme. Then you create some tension. And through the tension, you're demonstrating why that theme matters, why people want to listen to it. Then you want to give several fresh, actionable insights. Okay, 3 to 5 points that are building on these things. Then you want to illustrate each of those insights for application. So you want to give the actual point. You want to illustrate how that works in the real world. And then you want to summarize and give a clear motivational call to action at the end, very passionately, if you know Craig Groeschel.
Of course.
So that was the thing. And so we worked through that together, and he gave kind of a sample talk at the end. Obviously very teachy, very kind of one-sided. It was it was a lecture style. So we leave there. What is queued up on my next podcast list is from Rob Wagner, who leads the KC Underground, who's leading a movement of micro churches in the Kansas City area. And the title of the podcast was something about training. Here, hold on. It was how we train matters. And it was a pedagogy of learning for the new church or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So and I'm not going to read all of these. They had a number of things that go into their pedagogy. But so the first one out of the gates, Scripture is the curriculum, the Holy Spirit is the teacher. So you remove the teacher out of the middleman. The only role of the teacher is to get people to the Scripture and to help them process what the Holy Spirit is telling them. Okay. Discovery-based, not lecture-based. Okay, was a big one. So, because if the person has discovered it themselves, they're going to be more obedient. That's their whole premise. Is if they're told, they may or may not obey. Right. If they discover, they're going to be obedient. Yeah. And so they said what that comes down to is the role of the trainer is to ask better questions. That's like good. The main skill that we need to develop. And I was thinking about this, even we talked the leadership day in the last episode. How I think one of the skills that we need to train better here to our trainers is how to get to better questions.
That's great.
Because the questions are really what drives the learning.
Yeah, we just had a milestones training yesterday.
Yeah.
And that would be a good next step for that training because it was all about recognizing, but there wasn't anything about questions. That would fit right in there.
And think about Jesus. This is what he did. Like he told parables and asked questions. Yep. And like both of those things, like we're creating that same environment of like discovery. Like you realize what you don't know and you want to know it.
That's great.
So another one was practice and then debrief. Okay. So the whole idea of teaching is to help people to practice what we're teaching and then debrief afterwards. And again, they talked about high support, high challenge, high accountability. And so the trainer is there to help people practice this thing, and then we're going to talk about it. Tools over concepts. You won't be surprised that this got my attention.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah.
So, and I Rob gave me ammunition for this one.
Oh, great.
He said, entire ages of civilization have been named by tools. I'm like, yes,
very
okay,
true.
They're so important. And but the idea that tools are really handholds that help people get going. And then he shared this great Alan Hirsch quote. He said, people act their way into new ways of thinking.
Oh, yeah.
So if somebody doesn't know how to do something and they need to think about it different, we don't just lecture them. They act their way. Once they practice it, then their thinking shifts. And we often think of it in a different way, which again, it's upside down. I'm sure there's debate around these things.
Well, no, I mean, just think about, you'll come into this again with Ruby, but think about like your kids.
Right.
Like, can you imagine if you were just like, da, 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 da. It just doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I'll do one more. There was more than this, but they build around immediate sharing and designed to reproduce. In other words, when you do a training with somebody, when you have a training experience, that you want that person to be able to leave the room and go, I'm going to take 3 of my friends through this. So it would be simple enough that it wasn't this guru that came up with these very interesting words that I've never thought of before and downloaded them into my brain.
Oh, wow.
It's somebody walked me through this thing that I can turn around today and walk somebody else through the same thing. So again,
that would be amazing. That would be huge.
So I have this like collision of ideas, and I feel like I'm standing between two worlds, honestly.
I mean, yeah.
Because Casey Underground, obviously they're doing no sermons, they're doing no anything.
Yeah, they're
like,
full tilt.
Everything is full tilt toward training center, the group discovery, self-discovery kind of stuff. And obviously Life Church is the complete, it's like, it's all download. And I don't want to be like a middling person, but I do think that there's value to both.
I do too.
At some level.
Yeah, I do too.
But we're really trying to figure out, especially the non-Sunday morning message side of everything that we do, is like, how do we make it more of a training ground? You know, the quote that I shared at the beginning of this thing, the church in America is over-inspired and undertrained. And so we know how to inspire people.
Yeah.
But are people really trained to live out the Christian life in their daily lives? And I feel like that's what a lot of the stuff that we're creating is trying to get to. What I feel there's a gap still in, how do we not just create more programs that teach it the same way we've always taught it?
Yeah.
Like how do we make sure our methodology is matching our products? I mean,
this would be a very stark thing to do, and nobody freak out, I'm just brainstorming. But like, I'm thinking of this milestone training. The end of the milestone training was, who in your life do you think God has placed in your path that you would have, they're going through some sort of milestone that you need to kind of interact with, blah, blah. Who in this room can hold you accountable to having that conversation with that person by whatever date? Okay, yeah. Valid next step, good next step, part of the training. But really, if we could have done that, I think that's still valid, but added something like this where like, who are 3 people, who are 2 people, who's 1 person, you could take this, take through this training, who's your accountability, blah, 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 and then to be able to confidently, like when we can get to the point where we can confidently say, we are never holding this training again.
Right. Yeah. We've set it out into the wild.
Yeah. Now it's going to just go. And that's a lot to say.
That's the ideal.
That's the ideal, though. Yeah. Like we say it once, and then it multiplies a bazillion times out of our control.
Yeah, because the alternative to that, and here's where we find ourselves.
This is what we do.
The alternative to that is, okay, who's going to go through the next round of this training that those same people are going to do?
Yep.
And every time we do that, we limit ourselves to those 2 people's schedule, and how many times they can do this training. Versus like having it be in such, and I'm challenging myself here. This is not, I'm not,
because you also have to hold your there's parts of it you need to hold, and you want to be theologically correct, all the things that this butts up against.
Right. But it's like, if like thinking about our staff training day the other day, each of those talks, imagine if we created each of those talks so that it's not dependent upon the professional that came up with these ideas, but so easily graspable that everybody who went through, and then, like you said, the question at the end of those is, what 3 people on your team are you going to take through this in the next 48 hours?
Yeah.
Like literally, like,
and that's the same
walk them
question
through
again
it.
and again.
But to me,
it's good.
That's the only way that we get to more of this like disciple making, informal. Because it's like, the other question's been like, how do we scale people development? Like, it's such a weird, hard thing to get your brain around. But at some level, it is this, where it's just like, we're not going to have these programs that people can only get through if you come to hear Derek talk at 6 times a year, where he's going to do this training.
Yeah.
But the scalability comes when the training itself is reproducible enough that people can take it now and to create lots of venues where that can happen. Anyway, it wrecked my brain.
Oh yeah,
because within a period of 4 hours,
that's crazy.
I had it felt like I was on 2 different planets.
Yeah,
and I'm just going, these are two expressions of the church, not very far from each other, in the United States. Which is also funny, of like, couldn't be more different in the approach. And God, thank God that both are great and can exist in it. But we find ourselves going, I think we're being we're leaning toward how do we make this training stuff a little bit more discovery based.
Yeah, and I was messaging with someone on staff earlier this week, or was it last week, and I said I think what we're going to find is we're going to be leaning into this training stuff a little bit more aggressively because we're so rooted in this other model. We're good. We've got the teaching thing. Of course, stuff like that can also always improve, but we've got that. So you're going to feel the tension of us pushing. It's not because we're abandoning all this other stuff, but just what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so people even on our staff are starting to feel that. So yeah. That's cool. All right. Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's great.
So as we tweak our assimilation model to have more of a disciple-making focus and invent a multiplication funnel to awake the lake and reach our region, we're learning as we go. Each week we want to have a topic to discuss in front of and with you and practical moments of learning. And this week we've asked Pastor Dan to come. He's the pastor of Calvary Church in central Pennsylvania. He's married to Lynn, whom I guess maybe we'll learn about this someday. He met in his freshman year of college in a shower. So we'll let that go.
Will we?
Well, they have 4 children.
They were started that day.
Yep, they have 4 children.
He said they had like a water fight or squirt gun fight. Okay, can we just?
No.
I like it
where I
take the
edit
mystery.
that out. Just kidding. They have 4 children. He has his own podcast called More Than Bread, scripture-based podcast, and he's also a co-host of the podcast Nomad Chronicles. It's similar to this one. They're kind of on a journey to discover a new kind of church. And his church intentionally made significant changes during COVID, and some of them have led to what you guys are going to talk about.
Yeah, super insightful.
Yeah, so we're going to ask him to talk about focusing big church on front yard missions, and we'll send you to that interview right now.
Hey, everybody, I'm here with Dan Nold, a friend for a long time. Man, it seems like we've known each other for a while, right?
It has been a little bit.
Compatriots in our movement, Converge worldwide, and it's been just an honor to lead and learn from you for a long time, Dan, and appreciate all the good work that you're doing down in State College at Calvary Church. And you've been there for how long?
May of last year was 30 years.
30 years. Yeah.
Calvary is only my second church.
Wow.
But you've only had one, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, no,
Were you somewhere else before?
Yeah, I was a youth pastor at a church for about a year and a half before I came to Grace. So, and I'm entering my 30th year too. So we got a bunch of old farts here, reminiscing on the good old days.
You're on the younger side of old fart. I'm kidding.
Yeah, we were just talking about grandkids. You got a little gaggle of grandkids now, right?
We have 5 in Minnesota and 1 local and 1 on the way. So
wow, that's awesome. So hey, Dan, give us we're talking a little bit about contrarian change in churches these days, and as you know, we've the whole idea of this podcast, we're talking about reinventing church, and church going one direction. And again, we've been at churches for a long time, and so have had to navigate a bunch of changes, but want to talk specifically about some of the recent stuff that you guys have initiated at Calvary, and some of the thinking that was behind that, some of the things that you're navigating as you walk through that change. And so maybe take us back to I know COVID was a real turning point for you personally. I've heard you talk about this a couple times in different rooms. For you personally, but also for the way that you kind of viewed your role at the church and viewed the church's role in the world, and some of those things. And so I would love for you just to kind of talk about some of the shifts that happened, some of the insights that you gleaned during COVID, and talk about, what kind of emanated from that in the way you led your church.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things I'll say up front is I do think, looking back, and I have the benefit, and you do too, of looking back. There are changes that come upon us that if we didn't have a far scope looking back, it would seem really like out of the blue, like 180. But I do see the seeds of those changes and the themes of those changes all through the years. Like, it's like nothing caught God by surprise. He had been preparing us for this for a while, and I think my personal story, which kind of shifts into the corporate story as well. I had in 2020 a few of us went to Myanmar. We had been going to Myanmar every year for, I don't know, 15 years or so at that time. And didn't know if we should go. You'd started hearing these little pockets of, hey, what's going on here and with COVID and stuff like that. But we decided to go, and we went and came back and everything was fine. But then I did some consulting for a missions organization out in the Pacific Northwest. And on the last day of that, one of the guys didn't come in, and they said he was sick and so on and so forth. And I didn't think anything of it. But it turns out that he had COVID and gave it to a few of us in that consulting group. And so I came home, and you made, I'm sure you remember this, but we
were in a room.
Yeah, we were meeting with, like, at least here's the way I tell the story for added effect. We were meeting with some of the pastors of some of the largest churches in Pennsylvania. Yeah. David Ashcraft had pulled us together. How do we reach Pennsylvania together? Yeah. And, in the midst of it, that was in March, we started talking all about, COVID stuff and what's happening. And in the midst of talking, everybody just kind of decided, you know what, we need to get home tomorrow. Like that's how immediate it was in that moment.
Yeah, we left in the middle of the retreat.
Yeah, I was a little bit closer than you, so it was easier for me to leave in the middle of the night. But, and so, I went home, and, like, I don't know what it was, 2 or 3 days later, I had COVID, and so I'm sitting here thinking, great, most potentially leadership intensive moment of mine and everybody else's life, and I gave 13 or 14 of the pastors of the largest churches in Pennsylvania COVID. Now, as far as I know, nobody else got COVID, at least during that time.
And, I've never told you this, but having heard that you came from the Northwest, because I had heard that it was a hot spot when we were coming in, I stayed away from you. I did. I stayed on the other side of the room from you for the whole time.
I don't remember, and I think I wouldn't have noticed because most people try to stay away from me. That's just
nothing unusual.
Yeah. So I, that kind of began what I call, for me personally, my story was 3 words of surrender during the COVID time. And I'm not a, big, God speaks to me audibly kind of time, but I do have moments where I say, God spoke to me, and I quote, kind of, and those 3 words during that season, that's what it was. And the first one came while I was sick with COVID. I wasn't so sick that I had to go in the hospital. I didn't have the respiratory stuff, but it was probably the sickest couple of weeks that I think I've ever experienced. And in the midst of that, especially in those first few days, I'm just, wrestling with God and a little bit angry and, whatever, at least questioning God, what are you doing? I need to lead, and here I am. I can't get out of bed. I can't, whatever. And just that first word just so clearly to me was, Dan, you need to surrender control. And even a sense of God saying, the things that you've been yearning for, I'm doing, but you got to get your hands off it. You got to let me do what I'm going to do, and you got to surrender control. And so that was kind of the first piece of it. And then, we got into COVID, and I got better, and I was able to do what I needed to do. And I'm not even sure that I missed a Sunday preaching by video, because everybody did it different. And it doesn't even matter to me how anybody listening did it. But what we decided was, for a period of, I don't know, it was probably about a year, we didn't meet in person, and except for a few times outside. So everything was online. And so my second word came in the midst of, not being able to judge my success on that thing that every pastor says they don't judge their success on, which was butts in the seat. I was not willing to say, oh yeah, I'm sure that out of our viewers, 17.1 people are watching, every screen and stuff like that. And so, we had no idea how many are tuning in, who's doing what, all that kind of stuff. And so I couldn't judge my effectiveness on the filling of the room from Sunday to Sunday. And so we devised what we called an engagement matrix. And we had 6 things on that engagement matrix. 2 things, if they went above and beyond, counted extra. So we had 8 marks of engagement. And, and most all of those marks were things. I mean, at that point, wasn't that long since we'd only been going, virtual. So we could kind of look back, what were people doing? But a lot of them were things that people could continue doing. I mean, during COVID, we said to our folks, you got 2 jobs: love your neighbor and be still and know that he is God. And so there were still things that people could do. But as we started trying to put names into, the matrix, what we found is, number one, not even my whole staff, that 20, 25 people, were doing all 8. We had to go down to, 7 out of 8 to get 30 or 40 people, 6 out of 8 to get 50 or 60 people. We had to go all the way down to 4 out of 8. If you just hit 4 out of the 8 deals, and this was not hard. I mean, this is mostly
what were some of those marks?
Well, so as prayer ministry, are you praying? Are you praying for your neighbors? Are you involved in the prayer stuff that we do? Are you leading anything? Are you giving? And if you're giving, consistently, that was 2. Front yard mission, if you're loving your neighbor, if you're doing stuff consistently there, that was 2. So it was those kinds of things: leading, serving. I mean, not like over and above kind of things. And so what we found is we had to go all the way down to just give me 4 out of the 8 to get 200 to 300 people. And so I started saying to Calvary, and it was easier for me to do this because it was all virtual. but I started
look
saying
him in the eye.
Yeah, I didn't have to. I started saying to Calvary, we are not a church of 2,000 to 3,000. That's kind of what we claimed. We're a church of 200 to 300 with a really large fan base, maybe the largest fan base in Center County. But is that really what God wants for us? Is that really what we want for us? And so we started talking about, fans in the stands versus players in the field. And so that started a whole sequence of stuff. But for me, the surrender word there, in the midst of that, and again, I won't explain all the circumstances, but it was a moment of just, feeling like I clearly heard God's voice. It was surrender the crowd. Surrender control, surrender the crowd. And so that began a whole bunch of thinking, looking, soul searching, in terms of what is the church for, just even the whole. I remember talking to a pastor, I think it was Jeff Surratt, in the midst of that, saying, I just kind of explaining what I was feeling and the whole, changing the paradigm from go to church to be the church and all that kind of stuff. And he said, well, it seems to me like you have one of 2 choices. You can either, because what I was really feeling like is we have to do something to deprioritize Sunday morning. We have to do something to deprioritize going to church. That's not the heart and soul of what it means to be a Jesus follower. And I love church. I love preaching to a full room. I love our worship. I think we do church pretty well, at Calvary. And we've never wanted to be an attractional church, but we've always attracted people. And so I love church, and my wife loves church even more than I do. And so making some of those decisions was hard. But Jeff said, I remember he said, you have one of 2 choices. You can either do all of your Sundays less quality or do less Sundays. He said, you got to do something to say we're not putting all our energy into it. And so we decided, coming out of COVID, that we weren't going to meet every Sunday in person, which for a multi-site church that, would have, before COVID, we probably had 1,500 or so in average attendance, kind of, that whole deal. So that was kind of a big deal for us. And what I said in the beginning was, the reason we're doing this isn't because Sunday morning is the only time you have to meet your neighbors, love your neighbors, pray for your neighbors. It is a good time. It's one of the few times where our neighbors are home, with all the school activities and all the everything activities. It's pretty hard to consistently find an evening, but Sunday mornings people are still home. So it is a good time. But the main reason we made the change was because I realized if we make this change, I've got to talk about it every Sunday. Because if I don't, people will show up on the 4th Sunday. It's the craziest thing, and in fact, I found out later, people had a term for it. They called it getting sea-wowed. That's the fourth Sunday is our Sea-Wow Sunday, Church Without Walls. And so showing up at church, driving into the parking lot and seeing an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning has become known as getting sea-wowed.
Yeah, when they make a verb out of it.
Yeah, right.
It's something.
So that was my, surrender the crowd moment. And then the last one, and this has shaped some, but it's more a personal wrestling, I guess. But last one, I was actually in Minneapolis when George Floyd was killed. And one of my grandkids, my daughter Maisie, was born on the day that he was killed. And so I was there and went down to that little square where that happened. It was just, sitting and just wrestling with some stuff about my voice in the midst of all of this. And again, I just had that sense of God saying, surrender your voice. So surrender control, surrender the crowd, surrender your voice. And at that point, I'm going, okay, God, so you don't want me to be a pastor, right?
Yeah, what's left?
Yeah, control, crowd, and voice. What that's like, what I don't know what else you want me to do, but it was very clear that he was saying, no, I want you to be a pastor, but I want you to pastor in a different way. And so that just kind of, we were already doing Front Yard Mission. I would say since the late 90s, we've had some version of calling people to personal responsibility for their neighborhoods for 30 years. But Front Yard Mission was kind of our newest rendition, and we're putting more into it than we had for probably 10 or 15 years into that take responsibility for your neighborhood kind of deal. But we started pushing that in like 2017. But then in COVID, we just said we're going all in on this, and everybody has to have a mission. And again, it was kind of easy during COVID to say, this is what you're doing. Be still and know that He's God. Surrender control. Stop striving. Find your God place. And then love your neighbor. And so it just became an easy way to say we're still the church. Let's do it. So.
Yeah, I want to come back to the Front Yard Mission. We in a second here because we've been talking a lot about our two big shifts are changing the scorecard of discipleship and then changing the finish line of where discipleship ends. We want to extend outside the walls of the church. And so, I'm very curious to hear a little bit more. I know folks listening to hear a little bit more about the Front Yard Missions thing, but I want to go back for one moment. I remember you telling me one time in your infinite wisdom, that people won't know you're making a big shift until you mess with their Sundays.
Yeah. Right.
So I want you to just reflect a little bit for the folks listening about how that went, when you started messing with Sundays, like how did the church respond? Other than the people getting sea-wowed, like how did overall that affect your momentum, your ability to lead the church? How do people respond? That sort of a thing.
Yeah. So, a couple things I would say. I mean, number one, I would say people left, but that was, I mean, we during COVID, we had people leave on both sides of the three main issues: politics, how we dealt with COVID, and race. All three of those, I felt like my role as a pastor was to be an equal opportunity offender. So we had people on both sides leave. I did a good job. And then when we started meeting, initially it wasn't that big a deal because I wasn't taking away a Sunday. I was giving 3 back.
Oh, you went from 0 to 3.
Yeah. We went from 0 in person to 3. And so honestly, for the first period of time, it wasn't that big a deal. But then when people started realizing, oh, this is more than just a transition, He's actually thinking that this is better. Then we had people leave, and I'd sit down and talk with some of them. I say, so just tell me why, and well, because you're supposed to have church every Sunday. So did you go every Sunday? When we're meeting every Sunday? Well, no, but so really, what you're saying to me is you just don't want to be told which Sunday you can't go. It's a control thing, And it wasn't that way. I mean, some people had, strong convictions, and that's great. And God led them to a better situation for them. And they're making a difference where they are.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of the people who left were great people, love Jesus, want to make a difference in the world. But I would say right now, I think we're more at a place where people are here because of what we do, not in spite of what we do. We had a long period of time of people being here in spite. And, and I'll say to, anybody listening, I was in a unique spot, having, when COVID hit, having been here, whatever it was, 25 years or so, most of the people who left, a lot of them had been here longer than I had, but they left rather than putting up a fight because it was kind of like, he's not leaving, and I think some of those momentous changes can be harder for guys who have been there 3, 4, 5, 6 years, because there's going to be people who say, I'll wait him out and I'll make it miserable for him or her, whatever, to be here until I wait them out. But so
and there's also the proverbial, accumulation of chips as well. Chips that, that allows a longer term person to make bigger change faster, because of that trust that's built up. And for newer guys, they gotta wade through some years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my most important sermon series during COVID was a series that I entitled, God, what in the world are you doing? And I didn't go into it with this, but I ended up feeling like, okay, I think what God is doing is he put the world, but he put the church into a time of transition. And so I started teaching on transitions, and it used to be that I didn't make this up. I just don't remember who I heard it from. Probably, I don't even remember, but I used to say that your greatest times of catalytic spiritual growth are short-term mission trips and times of suffering. So sign up for the short-term mission trip, because nobody wants to schedule anything for suffering. But during that time, I added in times of transition, that some of our most catalytic spiritual growth happens in times of transition. We view a transition like an airplane ride: get on, get off as quickly as possible. Don't even make it nonstop, and just get there as quickly as possible. But I think God wants to get into our transition as deeply as possible, because there's stuff that he has to do in us to prepare us for the next chapter. And so I just developed a really strong conviction that not that everybody was going to transition to the same thing, same model, same exact whatever. I think the time of the model, hitting everybody is over. But there is a transition for his church, and so that was helpful too, because I could keep going back to that and saying, don't forget, here's where we're supposed to be headed, and God's got to do some stuff in us, and he's got to change some things and all that kind of stuff.
Good. That's a great takeaway. In fact, I was just writing it down, that those catalytic growth moments, suffering, short-term mission, or transition. I think that's really,
and the thing that all three of those, what I came to realize, what all three of those have in common is uncertainty. And as leaders, we hate uncertainty, but God loves uncertainty, because it causes us to glue our eyes to him a little bit more, put our ears open to him and stuff like that. So
let's circle back to the front yard mission. So just talk a little bit, give us the snapshot of what that is, what that means for people that might not be aware of that terminology and that program, and then maybe a success story or two that you've heard about your people leaning in. We've talked before about people being pastors of a parish, and kind of defining what that parish is. I know for us, we're kind of getting we're going a little bit more varietied than just neighborhood, but you guys have really dialed in on that love your neighbor thing. And so just give us the snapshot of Front Yard Missions and maybe a success story or two.
Yeah. I'll give just a little bit of a rationale for the neighborhood part, and then kind of spring out from there. But I mean, we tell people here, if you feel like God is calling you to pastor your workplace or your school or your whatever, go for it, but don't forget your neighborhood. I mean, Paul said, God determines the times and the boundaries of where we live, not just where we work, but where we live. And what I found is that when people say, well, we call it hashtag is the people you're praying for. My hashtag is at work. rarely do they invite the people from work into their home. And it's just a little bit harder to rub shoulders. Whereas when you're really seeing your mission as your neighborhood, you may spend, a lot of time at work. You spend more time at home. I realize some of that is sleeping, but your more flexible time is home. So anyway, we try to tell people, just don't forget your neighborhood. In Luke 10, when Jesus sends a 70 out 2 by 2 to every neighborhood that he's about to visit, he tells them, find the person of peace. And oftentimes in the other places, school, work, wherever, we are not the person of peace. We need to find that person. I think the one place where we are always the person of peace is in our neighborhood. And so for us, very simple. What we put down was 3 things. If you want to, do your front yard mission, we call it front yard mission because we all like to hang out in our backyards. And we just said, get out of your backyard. We even told people, move your fire pit to your front yard. A lot of people have done that because now all of a sudden, with your fire pit in your front yard, or your rocking chair on your front porch, or whatever, you see people and you talk to people and they come up and they join you and stuff like that. So that's why we called it front yard mission. Your front yard might be the front door of the church, all that kind of stuff. But we just said 3 things. It's pray first, love all, invite often. And for the invite part, we make a really big deal about do not make your first invite to the church. That's not your mission, is to get people to go to church. That's the old model. Invite people into your space, invite people into your life, and invite people into the life of Christ. And if in the process of that, they find out about church and they want to go with you, awesome. But it's really my hope that more and more we have less and less people coming to church without a friend already there, because more and more people are coming because neighbors have invited them. And so you kind of know, we've done, probably the place where we got the most creative is the invite part. And so we have more door hanger things for more things that people can invite people over to than I've seen in my lifetime. But donuts in the driveway, dinner in the driveway, we do stuff for Christmas, we do all sorts of stuff, and probably our donuts in the driveway has been the easiest and most effective at getting people together in a neighborhood. But there's I don't know, 10 or 12 other ones that we've pushed on people.
So the church's role in that is then just really to supplement what people are already doing, maybe give some new creative ideas or a group effort that, we're all doing this together at this time or whatever, and gives a little bit momentum to the movement.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll give kits sometimes, we'll do a push on donuts in the driveway and give people a kit that's a $50 gift card to Dunkin' Donuts and the door hangers and something else. We'll do kits, Christmas cookies. We'll do kits. Just different things. But you're exactly right. Resource people, inspire them, give them some opportunities to do it with others, share some stories, that kind of stuff is what we're trying to do.
That's cool. I really love the hashtag thing too. We kind of flew by that, but just give a little for people that don't know what that is, that there's like 9 boxes in a hashtag, right?
Yeah. So we stole it from, I don't remember who wrote the book on loving your neighbor, but
The Art of Neighboring.
Yeah, the guy, Art of Neighboring. Exactly.
Yeah, the guy
and so he called it the tic-tac-toe. We called it the hashtag because we're trying to reach the next generation. They know what a hashtag is, but not what a tic-tac-toe is. So, but yeah, it's you in the middle, and then you got the spaces around the outside. So we have cards that we give to people and say, put them down. And if it's somebody at school, somebody at work, somebody at whatever, but don't forget your neighborhood. And we did a survey, and I won't get these numbers right. So, but it'll at least give you an idea. We did a survey, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago, of people who are doing, of all the people at Calvary. And what we found was that people who were praying consistently for their neighbors, they were twice as likely, a little bit more than twice as likely to have had a gospel conversation in the last 6 months with one of their neighbors.
Wow.
And then we also found that people who filled out their hashtag card were like 3.5 times more likely to be praying consistently. So, everybody kind of said, "Oh, I don't need to fill that out. I know who my neighbors are. I know who I'm praying for." But the act of using simple tools really does make it more effective. It just keeps it in front of us, and we do it. And so we really push the hashtag card. It's like, that's not just the bare minimum. That's the most important thing you can do, but it's also the entree point. So that's who we count as being involved in front yard missions, is if they have a hashtag card and they're praying for somebody in their circle.
That's great. That's great. So we only have a couple minutes left. Thanks so much. There's just gold throughout all this stuff that you've said. But, I've told you before, every room I've been in with you, you have this kind of like sage-like presence. And so I would love for you just to reflect a little bit. We've had many long conversations about this, but just reflect a little bit so people can hear you just about where you see the church in America right now. What kind of pastors, we've got pastors that listen to this that are from big churches, small churches, everything in between. Like what should pastors be thinking about and focusing on, kind of based on where our country sits right now and the Church of America is kind of living right now? And again, I know we could talk about that for hours, but give us the 3-minute version of.
Well, like I said, I think in these last 4 or 5 years, God has been putting, and I'll get a little bit emotional. This stuff just kind of comes on me, but God has been putting the church in a time of transition, and I think that's global to some extent, but for sure the church in America. And so I don't know that I can name the transitions for everyone. I think there are some common ones, but I think every time I try to name, what I think are the common ones, it's not necessarily for everyone, but I'll do the most controversial one first. I think God is trying to transition the church from being politically motivated to being, just love your neighbor, do the stuff that Jesus did. And I'm not against politics. I do think the church, if we could fast from anything for a couple of years, politics would be a good thing to choose. But we need people, salt and light people in politics. But I think over the course of the years, we've come to the point of thinking we will change the world through politics. And I'm hoping that the church is coming to a point of seeing, or at least a part of the church is coming to the point of seeing, that doesn't work. It was never Jesus' plan to change the world. He wants to change politics through Christians, but not change the world through politics. So that's one transition. I think the second transition I already mentioned, that we have to, and I think it can look different in every church, but we have to get away from the go to church mentality versus the be the church mentality. And I'm not even saying that didn't work before. I think it did, and I think in some cases it's still working. But I think overall, that model is not the model that God has for the church in America in the coming years. We need to realize that, the next generation is more open spiritually maybe than any generation for generations, but they're very skeptical of the church. They're even the ones who believe in Jesus and want to make a difference in the world, they do not believe that the best place to make a difference in the world is in the church.
That's right. Yeah.
And so something has to change, it's not even just that something has to change, but if Jesus is building his church, I believe that something is changing, and I just don't want to be left behind. During COVID, I don't know, I was probably on, Zoom calls with hundreds of pastors over the course of that year and a half, even globally, just kind of how you doing, what's going on, what are you doing, what can we learn from each other? And if there's one common thing that I felt like I heard over and over again, it was pastors saying, I don't know when this is going to end. I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is that when it ends, we cannot go back to normal.
Right.
And what I think happened was I think the vast majority of us ran back to normal as quickly as possible. And that's not a word of condemnation, because I 100% understand that. Normal is what we know. And with a heart for the church and a heart for people, we wanted to help people, help the church. And so the easiest thing was to go back to what we know. But I don't think God is going to let us stay there. So he's going to keep us in transition until we make those changes. So you got to figure out, what are the transition marks in your church that you want to kind of hang on to. Like, another one for us is, we want to do ministry one to few, not one to many, and so we talk about that all the time. We want to be the church scattered, not just the church gathered. All of that personal responsibility. I believe with all my heart that we cannot get transformation in people without people being on mission. I think mission comes first, in fact. I think when people get on mission, they realize how much they're not like Jesus. Right. They begin to want to be like Jesus, and because they want to be like Jesus, and they spend time with Jesus. And I think Luke 10 gives us that outline: go on mission, be a good Samaritan, love like Jesus, sit at Jesus' feet like Mary. It's that order. We try to reverse it and have people sit at Jesus' feet first and then become like Jesus. And when you're enough like Jesus, we'll send you out on mission.
Wow.
And it just doesn't work. And not anymore. I think maybe it used to. And that's, kind of the funnel thing. You know all about that.
Yeah.
And I think God's just calling us to do church in a different way.
I love it, Dan. Thanks so much, man. I just appreciate your friendship so much more than anything, but I also appreciate how you lead and how you're walking, through changes with your church. And it's just really, really inspiring every time we get a chance to talk. So,
and I am a fan of Derek and Grace too. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
all that you're doing. Yeah.
Thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Okay, so there's Dan for you.
I love Dan. He's
cool.
He's an incredible guy. He's been a friend for a long time. So yeah, just always fun to talk to him. I said at that last, every room I'm in with him, he has this like deep, when he talks, it's like, oh, everybody listens.
And like when you meet him, you don't.
No, he's unassuming.
He's just a really cool leader.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened this week.
Okay.
Ish. This past few weeks, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and help me explain this, but we basically, long story short, we had this framework that we were using to kind of chunk up and chase down this vision that we have as we're reinventing church. Like there's an Awake the Lake vision that we're chasing after with metrics and whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, full disclosure.
We kind of screwed it up.
We screwed it up. Aaron realized, actually, wait a minute, these don't go together. And you guys, I think, probably had a conversation about it.
And what's interesting is that, like, the words we were putting to it, and Aaron was putting to it a little bit, was just like, hey, it feels like content's running ahead of everything else.
Yeah.
And, like, people are getting frustrated on staff because it seems like we're creating content and we're driving the organization forward.
Right.
Well, part of the reason is because we kind of lost track of this kind of framework.
Yeah.
That is a really helpful kind of change management tool. It helps kind of keep us all moving in the same direction.
Yep.
And we had built short-term goals, mid-term goals, long-term goals. We'll just call them those.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were chasing those goals, but there was a little bit of confusion around like
who, when, why.
Who, when. Are all the short-term goals attached to long-term goals? Are they their own thing? Or were they? So there was some confusion around the goal. And basically, I think our staff was frustrated.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it felt like a malaise, a little bit of just unclarity. And so I know you guys were in a room. You can take it from there. You guys were in a room the other day where Aaron kind of represented the vision frame, and I think it had a super clarifying effect.
Oh yeah, for sure. He was able to just kind of in front of our key leaders on staff. He was able to just say like, hey, we messed this up. We started, it was just like a creep thing. Like we understood at the beginning and then just kind of morphed, which is something that we can do sometimes because of the pace that we go at. But he was able to just kind of say, this isn't right. And let me give you clear language and directives about how we're going to do it going forward. Yeah. And I think everyone was super energized by it. If not, you can put a question in and let us know. Yeah. But I really do. I was like really positive. You could feel like the room just kind of like leaning in, like, and it just reminded me like, vision and clarity of vision will just like push people forward.
Yeah. And you said something that was helpful for me about it being a metaphor.
Yeah.
And so we use, obviously when we cast a vision, and other leaders know this, like when you cast a vision to your constituency, you choose metaphors, you tell stories, there's ways to kind of paint pictures of the future, this is where we're going, and there's things that you say to kind of mobilize people and inspire people. And that. One of the things that was helpful as we've talked about this is that you also need a metaphor, some metaphors probably, but a key metaphor to keep the change management toward that vision clear,
the leaders,
for the people who are actually making the change. So those leaders, your staff, whoever that might be, that all the talk from the front to the constituency is not necessarily what's actually going to drive the day-to-day change. You need different language for that. That helps keep the people who are driving the change on track.
And that's what I think was happening to some extent. People were grasping onto language that they heard either like on a Sunday or even in this discussion.
Podcast,
like, what about this? What about this? But I heard somebody say this, and then in this meeting they said this. We didn't have this North Star of like the leadership language, the blueprint of what we can keep returning to. And I really think this is going to help us, I hope, moving forward.
And as always, full disclosure that, this frame that we are using comes from Clarity House. This is part of our process with them, who walked us through this whole thing. They've been incredible. And so, it's kind of like, I don't want to ever throw them under the bus because they gave us this
they gave
tool.
it to us clearly.
They gave us this tool and said, use this. And then we're like,
we're like,
squirrel,
we'll use this. But what we used, it's literally a frame. And we did was
talk about the frame. I think it might be helpful for people.
So the frame it's just
4
like
sides.
a picture frame. Picture frame with 4 sides. It's made up of side 1 is measures. So when are we successful? When do we know we're successful? The other side is mission. What are we doing? What do we do? Strategy is how we're doing it. And values are why we do it. So none of that is groundbreaking. But if you think of it as a frame, that holds your vision proper. It holds together where God is taking you. Suddenly you have boundaries. You have a fence around what you're chasing after. And I think that framework, for lack of a better, is exactly what we needed and exactly what we need to remember. And what we did with this, instead of taking the frame and the picture, we took the picture.
And left the frame behind.
And there's nothing wrong with the picture. But it would have went real sideways. It could have. If we didn't put it back in that frame.
So let me say, it just popped into my mind right now. I've never even thought about it before. But like one of the fascinating things about that is I think generally, and when we've done this before even, but generally when leaders talk about vision and mission and all that kind of stuff, it's often like you start with vision. And then kind of work back from that is not the process.
That's not what we did
through.
with them.
In fact, you kind of read it a little bit. You started with measures, but it actually starts. We started with mission. What do we do? Strategy. How do we do it? Values. Why do we do it? Then measures. When are we successful? So we did all of that, and our measures are those discipleship measures, and that. Then in the middle of that is where, with that as the frame. Now, where are we going? Where's God taking us? What does it look like in the future if all of this stuff happens in a way that we believe God wants it to happen? And you're right. What we did is then took that vision out, removed it, and said, here's what we're chasing after, almost made it its own thing. And I think reframing it like Aaron did for our staff was like super helpful to go, we're never going outside these boundaries. This is what kind of gives us our marching orders as we go. So,
Yeah, it was really good.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Good?
I'm good.
I'm good, you too. Good? I'm great.
Great. Danielle.
Yeah, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, you can tell us by leaving a rating or review, and remember to subscribe so you see what's coming up next. You can find detailed show notes and related resources over at dereksanford.com/reinventing church. That's where you can also subscribe to his newsletter. You can get any kind of, you get like a lot of tools.
Yeah, there's a lot of free tools.
Fun little things that you're interested in and whatever. So go ahead and do that, and then we will see you next week. Thanks.
See you, everybody.